Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. I'd like to show you 3 blitz games in the King's Indian that I played this summer. As you know, throughout the summer I played a couple of tournaments, 2 standard tournaments and zillions of these blitz tournaments and games. And I just chose typical King's Indian games with lots of sacrifices. You're going to be able to see games against 2 GMs and 1 FM. It's quite interesting. I defeated those 2 gems, but I lost to an FM. But I'll show you how, and you have a critical final position. And I just have to tell you that I'm going to also share my, thoughts and simply thinking process while I was playing these games. So get ready for something really nice, because a couple of brilliances, but also incredible blunder in one of these games. Let's get started. In Silver Lake Blitz tournament, I was black against FIDE master Akash Chandra Dalvi from India. The guy went for d4 knight f6, e4 g6. As you know, I really much enjoyed the King's Indian with the black pieces lately. So after knight c3, bishop g7, e4 d6, knight f3 castles, bishop e2, I played e5. I always point out when I talk to my students, always first play e5, then knight c6, because most of you think like, can we play and can we go with e5 instantly? Because what's gonna happen if they take, trade the queens off? And now you have like 2 kinds of fears. First of all, why should we trade the queens off and play those kinds of games? Well, you shouldn't be afraid. They can take on e5 because you take on e4 and get a knight back on e5. If they play bishop g5, threatening knight d5 and threatening on d8, on f6 and on c7, all you have to do is just move the rook here or simply play bishop e6. And anytime they jump with the knight on d5, you're just going to take it and execute that with a bishop on e6. My opponent went for castles, which is the main move, and here I just chose to play knight c6. It's the introduction into the Mar del Plata, one of the most important and most common things, and one of the main variations of the King's Indian. I played knight c6, and I especially enjoy his faster time controls. He went for d5, I brought the knight back to e7, and he didn't play Mar del Plata, but opted for most popular and, according to the engines, absolutely most promising move for white against King's Indian. It's called bayonet attack. He went for b4. An idea of the bayonet is to go c5, play knight d2, knight c4, play a4, bishop a3, push the pawn to b5, and kind of create weakness on d6. I played Nakamura's favorite knight e8 move, and even though it's considered to be not to be the best move, better moves are a5 or knight h5, I just opted for knight e8 because in faster time controls, in blitz and rapid games, you can go with this sometimes a little bit suspicious lines. But by the way, they're suspicious because of maybe one line and one possibility for white, so you don't have to panic and you can easily go into something like this. I went knight e8. My plan is to go and break in the center with f5. He went for c5, I played f5, and he went with the knight d2. A typical plan. He wants to go knight c4, a4, bishop a3, b5. Nothing. I played knight f6. I usually say don't play f4 because of bishop g4, and they are going to eliminate one of the most important attacking pieces, that's the bishop on c8. So that's why we go with knight f6. And when you play knight f6, you're just waiting and kind of committing these guys to actually commit themselves. They have to go with f3. You go f4. Why? Because the center is closed, so you close your game and unleash the attack on the king side. So after a4, g5, knight c4, in order at some point to be able to take on c5, I need to defend this on g6, and I anyways need my knight in the attack with the knight g6. I played knight g6, he played bishop h3, I played h5. As you know, according to old good rule of Mar del Plata and bayonet attack positions, you just want to go with the g4 break at some point. Unlike Mar del Plata, where you let them take on d6 and you go for traditional rook f7, bishop f8, and rook g7, Here in a bayonet attack, you don't do that. You actually wait for them to push b5, and once they push b5, and once they create weakness, you don't bring your knight back on e8 to defend d6. No, you take on c5 and move your rook on f7. This is why we need our knight to defend the pawn on e5. This is why we take on c5, so we can exchange the dark square bishops, because we really have problems with the bishop on g7 and it doesn't do anything. And finally, we're gonna move the rook to g7, go with the g4, and do some sort of action on the g file. I played rook f7. He went for the rook c1. As soon as he played rook c1, I knew that he didn't play the most accurate move. I didn't like it, so I went for g4. I feel very happy and very promising with a good attacking prospects when I do the g4 in the King's Indian and Mar del Plata in general, because now you're the one who's in the driver's seat. And here he went for the d6. For example, in those games between Nakamura and Gelfand and Nakamura, Belyavsky and Nakamura, then a couple of other games played against Grandmaster Frank Reichert, and these guys with the white pieces went for a5 and b6. Although my opponent didn't go for that, he played rook c1. I immediately realized that that rook on c1 can only maybe give support to the knight on c4 at some point, and the bishop on c5, you'll see why, and nothing more than that, because it definitely doesn't belong there. So after rook c1, I played g4, and he played d6. It's one of the typical moments for a bayonet attack, and I can easily say one of the most important rules is once they play d6, you gotta go with your bishop on e6. And it always solves your problems, especially because when they take, you can now take by rook, for example, on c7. And now you see why did I tell you that this rook actually defends the knight and the bishop, because in some moment, at some point, it can just defend the knight on c4 somehow, but I actually see lots of problems against the knight on c4 and bishop on c5 here, and I even believe we're almost winning a piece there. So I was supposed to play bishop e6, but somehow it's a blitz game, it's a fast time control, so I couldn't resist. I played g3. When I did it, I saw that my opponent wants to take, and he's now taking. Makes no sense to take by rook because the queen is hanging, so I gotta take by queen. I saw bishop d6 and I saw knight e5, and somehow I said, I'll be honest with you, this was a blitz game, and my thinking process was like, I played g3, I created some weaknesses around the king. I know that I'm not supposed to take because he's gonna be hidden by our pawn on h2 if I do that, but somehow I was just hoping I'd be able to come up with some sort of tactics. Although it's a critical way of thinking. Usually but it's a blitz game, faster time control, so you can give yourself, let's just say, that way of thinking and that kind of luxury to think that way. So intuitive way of thinking. And here, when he played knight e5, something crossed my mind, and all of a sudden I came up with the knight on e8. After the game, he said he didn't see this move, he kind of liked it, because now I'm threatening his bishop, I'm giving up my knight, but on top of all that, I've just opened up the queen d8, queen h4 threat. The guy went knight f7, captured my rook, and I brought my queen on h4. It's a very interesting one, because I'm threatening mate in 1. I realized, that's what I saw, if h3, that I'll take bishop h3. I couldn't find any defense from him, and I said, okay, it looks great. He played h takes, that's what I saw, and I said, okay, I'm down an exchange here, and I should be fine. My opponent played bishop c4, creating lots of open discoveries and threats. So I said, okay, let me just go with the knight f4, threatening mate on g2. And look what happened here. The guy played queen d2, defending on g2. And you know, what did confuse me during that game? He absolutely played queen d2 without any thinking, stone cold, absolutely without any emotions, just like a good bluff in poker. And you know, I just kept on looking on at the position, and I said, okay, he's defending g2. Unfortunately, he's got lots of discoveries. I didn't use the typical thinking process like checks, captures, forcing lines and threats. If I did it, I would instantly find the bishop d4 check. If he takes bishop d4, I just deliver checkmate. If he goes rook f2, I just deliver checkmate. If he goes here, mate. So I missed mate in 2. Can you believe it? I played bishop e6. The guy probably braid off after this, but I still have the bishop d4 with a mate in 2. It's incredible. I once again have mate in 2. I missed it. I took on e6. He played knight a2, and eventually, even after this, it wasn't that easy, but he managed to win the game. But it's incredible how simply sometimes emotions of your opponents can confuse us. So you're not supposed to fall for that. That's one thing. And another thing, I really have to say that I was a victim of my own, that's what I'm actually teaching my students. Guys, you always have to go in every position that is messy, complicated, with lots of opportunities. Go with the thinking process. Checks, captures, forcing line threats. Maybe something is gonna, pop up, and maybe all of a sudden you're gonna find some tactical thing and win the game. I didn't do that here, and I lost the game. So somebody said, Maya, why don't you show some of your losses? I just showed you. It's a pretty embarrassing one, let's be honest. And just to redeem myself a little bit, now let me just show you how I defeated 2 GMs. The best Serbian junior, Budisavljevic, 2500. It was one of the Blitz tournaments. He went for a very modern h4, or like Ginger GM says, hairy attack with the h-pawn. So went for the h4. That variation has lots of transpositions and became very popular lately. I played bishop g7, knight c3, d6, and I was expecting e4, in which case I would go castle and d5, a typical King's Indian approach. He played d3. I said, okay, if that's the case, let me just break with c5 and go with some sort of Benoni or similar to Peart's defense type of ideas. So I played c5. I was expecting d takes c5, in which case I very much like queen a5 with the idea of knight e4, and I can capture if bishop d2 by queen on c5 and go with this position, probably b4, then you gotta put your queen back here. I wouldn't just take there on b4, probably queen c7, and that's the way it is. The thing is, he played h5. He decided to sacrifice a pawn. I grabbed that pawn. We can also say for a move like h4 and h5 to be kind of bluffing idea, because okay, it looks fine for white. Sometimes it looks like they want to sack this exchange by rook takes h5, but I wasn't afraid. I said, okay, if that happens, he's gonna have lots of problems with the center. So after knight h5, he just continued to play normally. I brought a knight back to f6, e4. I broke in the center with a6, took on d5, played a6 to play b5, a typical queenside, like it one's there. So after a4, to prevent b5, I played knight bd7, controlling the dark squares, mainly e5 square. Bishop f4, threatening the pawn on d6. I played queen e7, defending and also controlling e5, also pressuring the pawn on e4. Played queen c2, and I played short castle. I'll be honest with you, I didn't find a way, and I wasn't afraid during the game, because I couldn't find a way for white to simply take advantage of the open h-file. Also, I'm a dragon player myself, and I'm familiar with these kinds of things. When the h-file is open, it's not the end of the world. So after knight f3, I played h5. That h5 move is pretty interesting. h5 doesn't give him any knight g5, knight h7 afterwards. h5 gives me, for example, I wanted to go with this one. A pretty typical move, opening up the bishop, controlling and taking control of both of these diagonals. And I just said, okay, that could be one of my main ideas. But I was a little bit afraid of some knight g5, threatening on h7 and threatening my knight. And in blitz, you, just like I previously said, intuitively come up with your decisions. So I said, okay, I won't go for that. let me just go with something like h5, solidifying my position, avoiding any kind of knight g5, avoiding any kind of g4, and somehow I just like my position, and I'm willing to go with some knight g4 afterwards. He played knight e2, over protecting e4. I played knight e5, bringing my knight into the center. He played bishop g5, which was pretty nice. He wants to break with f4 and e5 in the center. Also, once he plays f4 and move my knight, he's going to get a c4 square for the knight, which is very important in all Benoni type of games. But keep in mind, I'm up a pawn, which means a lot. So I played queen c7, removing from the pin, and there is no more pin on my queen. Now my queen is safe, and at the same time, by x-rays, I'm just controlling the e5 pawn. He went for f4, I played knight g4. Now, I seriously and easily take advantage of being up a pawn because there is a big lack by white since the h2 pawn simply doesn't exist to prevent h3 or once the knight comes to g4 to kick it away with h3. So I played knight g4. I am just threatening knight e3, harassing the queen and the pawn on g2. And the guy played knight c4. I said, okay, no big deal, let me just complete my development. And he decided to break in the center. All the time I realized that I was controlling just everything. He played d6 and wanted to take on e5. And somehow he started to create some threats. But here something crossed my mind. I just took a look at this position and realized there is a nice tactics. And indeed, I did something very nice. I sacrificed a piece. In the worst case scenario, I can even have 3 pawns for the piece, which is not that bad if something goes wrong. So I said, let's go with it. But I realized that when he captures, and he did capture, I'm going to play queen g2, and he would have problems with the rook on h1 and bishop on g5. After bishop f6, I took the rook. I came up with check. I took that bishop. He played knight d7, and the end of this game was very beautiful. I came up with this check and mated this king in the center of the board. So that was one very nice win in the King's Indian. Let's be objective. He didn't play that opening that well, a little bit careless. And also in, I believe, 8 finals afterwards, in the finals of these Blitz tournaments, we once again faced, and then I lost to him 1.5 to half, and he qualified in the top 4. So let me just show you the last game. Last game I played against Grandmaster Bryakin, the guy, strong GM who wins most of these, especially in Blitz, most of these Blitz tournaments in Serbia. He was Russian, took the Serbian citizenship, and now he's just playing for Serbia. Just like I said, very solid GM, great in, like shuffling around his pieces, good in, like pretty solid positions. And then I said, when I say solid, he's actually a good GM, but solid in terms of positions and playing. And I knew that. So I said, okay, if that's the case, I got to come up with something crazy. So I played bishop g7, bishop g2, castles d6, and here I opted for knight bd7. For a long time, I used to play knight c6, and after knight c3, old Michal Tal's and Fischer's line bishop g4, where you give up the bishop and then play knight d7 and break with these knights in the center, a3, e5, d5, knight e7, you go f5, knight f6, queen d7, rook f7, doubling these rooks, and this is a very weird type of the game. You go for the typical similar to Mar del Plata type of the game and attack on the king's side, although without a light square bishop, which is a little bit weird, right? But I decided to play knight bd7 and to go with e5. In the game, he went for knight c3, e5, queen c2, I captured on d4, played rook e8, rook d1, c6, and he played b3. I played knight c5, bishop e2, and queen e7. I'd like to stop here and to say that I played like this against international master Munijaba last year in Serbian League. I won a very nice game. And here I just analyzed a few days before that some game between grandmaster, I believe it was Gavrikov or Chernin, who were white, against Garry Kasparov. And I knew that these guys played d3 and my opponent played d3. And I said, okay, I can apply Gary's plan here. So I went for h5. An idea of h5 is to simply break with h4 on the king side and to create some sort of king side threats. What am I hoping for? Maybe h4, maybe h4, h3 afterwards, maybe h4, h takes g3, just like Gary did, and sack one of those knights on after on g3 and to create some sort of messy attack. He went for h3 and I played a5, maintaining my knight into the center. He played a3, I played bishop d7, played b4, kicking my knight away, and I played knight e6. I was absolutely sure that this position was fine for black, and indeed it was. Here he played knight f3, which is a good move because he prevents my knight g5. I played also, he wants to go with the queen d2 and go after my potential weakness pawn on d6. I played knight c7, and initially I wanted to place my bishop on f5 and I want to play d5 if needed. He he once again brought the knight back to d4, and you know the guy is strong in blitz, he's white, and he repeats. I brought my knight back on e6, and now you put a psychological pressure on your opponent. He's white, he's definitely a better player than you. He has to go for a win and force the matters. And objectively speaking, knight f3 was way better than knight b3, what he did in the second turn. And now I just said myself, good, because now I have an easy attack. And look, this game lasted for 6 more moves. I played knight g5, threatening on h3. He probably saw that the king h2 should defend himself and kind of underestimated my move queen e6. Look at the battery, bishop d7, queen e6, attacking the pawn on h3, but also look at the fact that I'm threatening this pawn on c4. He played h4, thinking like, okay, if I move the knight, nothing too serious, we can just carry on, but I stuck my knight on h3. Now I'm threatening knight g4. He can't take, because I would just mate him with the queen h3 and the knight g4. He played knight to d4. And when he played knight to d4, I spent like a couple of seconds for the following combination and literally destroyed him here. So I played knight g4. Knight g4 goes after the king, forcing the king, because if he goes with the king like this, I'm literally mating him. I'm first going to take a couple of times, and then I'm going to take on d4 to get rid of the spin. He didn't do that. He played king to h3, and this was an important intermediary move, knight g4, because now I've just opened up the bishop on g7 to take that knight. I removed that knight. I removed the pressure from the queen, and I'm threatening knight takes e3, discover it to win the queen. He played bishop d5. I captured instantly, then started the thing. Found that after knight f2, queen h3, I had this one, and he resigned once again. So thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed in this King's Indian presentation. I also tried to explain you how do we think during these games, and those were some games from summer. Finally, I showed you one of my embarrassing losses. I didn't find mate in 2, but okay, still, those were some very nice games with some very nice ideas, and just like I said, hope you enjoyed it. See you next time, and thanks.